Earning an executive MBA at Georgetown isn't the path of least resistance, but it does come with the greatest reward. Benefit from our strong alumni network, renowned faculty, DC location, and global residencies. Get started at choosegeorgetown.com/EMBA.
Please listen carefully.
This is an Aquarian Radio special podcast. I'm your host, Karen Christine Patrick. Welcome to the Aquarian Radio podcast. My name is Karen Christine Patrick. We're doing these podcasts to bring fresh material to Aquarian Radio. Today we're talking to Jeffrey Boyd Jr., and he lives at Poverty Point, Louisiana. He's telling us today about the patterns that he has recognized in the ancient structures that fit with other ancient sites. Jeffrey Boyd Jr. is a researcher, chemist, metallurgist, and his heritage is of the Cherokee Nation. Jeff currently resides on Poverty Point, an area where hundreds of years ago the Cherokee and Native people had an expansive settlement that was a hub of trade in the area. With an avid, hands-on experience with various sites around America and his knowledge of science and industry, Jeff sees patterns all over the world at all the ancient sacred sites. Our ancestors at one time had a higher level of advancement than what is written in the history books. Jeffrey Boyd Jr. comes to us on Aquarian Radio to share the information about these patterns, the artifacts and stories that create an overarching narrative with the past and present, the surface world and the underworld, the earth, and true space.
My name is Jeff Boyd, and I live in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I research everything from, right now I'm doing a lot of resonance testing, on different tones, and also, it connects to the, you find it on the floors of places in India. You can tell that they knew about it back then. You find that everywhere, but even in Poverty Point is where I live. And so I'm like taking another look at everything around here differently. It wasn't a bunch of naked Indians, and everybody looking at it, and the tours I've been on before, like as a kid at Walter Jacobs Park, they kind of tell you that that's what it was, and just the name Poverty Point kind of puts this picture in your brain that it was, a tribe that was just, a bunch of guys sitting around a campfire, going hunting in teepees and stuff, and they weren't. And, these are guys that literally had turbans and wore shirts and jackets, and, I found so much evidence of that and old pictures and drawings. And I've been down to Mexico quite a bit, and I've found I'm a Four Winds Nation Cherokee, and the rest of them is Irish and Scottish. But my, just talking to my family and going and looking back through the Four Winds Nations stuff, I found if you didn't know beforehand it wasn't a Cherokee symbol, you would. If I showed it to you, you'd automatically think that it's Mayan or something from Mexico, because it looks exactly like that. But yeah, at night I do resonance testing, but I'm in the Mars Anomaly Research Society, I'm the Lunar, the Mars Space Photos Zoom Club, and now from last night the Earth Anomaly Research Society and the Quantum Physics Forum. And so I'm kind of all over the place, but I've just found over time that the more I research, the more all those roads lead to the same place, and that we've done this before. That civilization's been here before. If we were just to destroy everything right now or have something go on, our iPhones wouldn't survive. Our computer data wouldn't survive, but stone tablets and stuff would. But we also know that pharaohs and Zahi Hawass is a perfect example. They were famous for destroying the name of the person before them and taking the credit for something. And, I think that's why the library at Alexandria was destroyed, because the elite back then wanted to be the elite. They wanted to be able to say that they are the smartest ever in the universe ever, and they're the pinnacle of intelligence. And it sounds really stupid if you say it when you say it out loud. It's like we're the smartest beings that have ever been. That means we live in a really dumb universe. But I just don't think that's the case. And the Mayans say this is the 6th time we've done this.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Alexandria, because I got into the study of Alexandria, and I studied the lighthouse of Pharos, and that is a perfect example of what you're talking about. The pharaoh that was reigning at the time did not want the builder's name on it, and so the builder put a lighter plaster over he put his name on the lighthouse. Then he put kind of a lighter plaster substance that lasted about, 50 to 100 years, something like that. And over time, the pharaoh's name wore off, and his name ended up being on the thing, because it was very much a feat of an accomplishment of architecture, that some of these things that we look at, we still can't do. And the lighthouse, I think it stood up for something like 1,300 years, something ridiculous, till earthquakes took it down. But it had a lead in the mortar between the stones, and it kept it up. And it would have been, as I kind of discovered where it fit in history, I realized that it had to be the tourist attraction of all the famous names, Cleopatra and Caesar, and all the Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony. They all would have had to have climbed it at one time, just because it was really tall, and people climb the Eiffel Tower or something like that to go look at the scenery. They're all up there, right? All these famous names. We didn't, and this thing was like maybe as tall as a Space Needle. I don't know. It was really tall, and it stood for a very, very long time. The whole entire complex where the Library of Alexandria was, the whole entire harbor there was set out in motion by Alexander the Great, was the one who set that all in motion. And these guys had technology, they weren't knuckle-dragging caveman kind of people. They had a very sophisticated technology to make these citadels, and you've been studying that. So tell more. That's great.
Yeah, and things connect so much, and it's weird that you can say that. And I was studying the Burroughs caves. Yeah, I just sent you over that Cherokee symbol that looks Mayan, but it's It's pre-Mayan. Doesn't that look? If you weren't told, you would think that that's Mayan. But that's from here. That's why I think this was Aztlan, where they were from. And you even find the same symbol all the way up to, I think the last one they found was in Wisconsin and Nebraska area. And but you would think that. But yeah, my family name, and I'm Cherokee, but that part of my family on my dad's side is our name was Alexander, or the name origin of Alexander. And so you have some Indians with the name of Alexander, and like Alexander Helios, and in the Burroughs cave you see Alexander Helios there. So they were coming over here and we were going over there, and there's so much evidence of it. That's what I'm saying. Everything connects. Even my name is from Alexander the Great, and I'm Cherokee. That's from my Cherokee part of the family, and but lately it's just like the past few weeks, all my different little courses of study, things seem to be leading to the same place. When you see architecture that just looks like it doesn't fit on the moon, it looks like as a crest that you see, like, in Iraq or in Mexico or somewhere. And you just see all these things. And before, we just just like the ruins here, we weren't looking at them with the right eyes. Like, no one ever considered that they had high science. And you see it all over the place, that we didn't recognize a lot of the, we're just now starting to figure out what they were writing. We thought that they were drawing pictures of this or that, but then when we come out with a new technology, we're like, oh, that looks just like this.
Oh, yeah.
It's like we're just now getting advanced enough to stand a lot of the petroglyphs and hieroglyphs.
Yeah. Yeah, like in Abydos, Egypt, literally laser burned into a wall or a column is the circle of life symbol, which we're now finally coming into quantum physics. We're understanding energy, the subtle energy that underlies the universe, so structures rather than the atoms and molecule and particle physics, as you'd say. And, in other words, as we grow up ourselves and learn a particular thing, we suddenly go back and look at these ancient cultures and realize we're playing catch-up.
Absolutely.
We suddenly recognize, that's what that is,
Yeah, the snake
we've made it.
Tail. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, we've covered a lot of things. I really want to hear your story and living in Poverty Point. I'd not heard of it. I got very excited when I read about it and posted in the Earth Anomaly Research Society. I'm trying to catch up and learn because I've been learning from other members, like other people, Michael E. Hill, and other researchers. I got up to Chaco Canyon. Now that I live in New Mexico, 2 years ago I got up to Chaco Canyon, so I learned about that culture. There was a very vast culture on the North American continent. And just to add for some fun, I also been researching Romanian culture and Albanian culture. There was a subterranean culture, and a few months ago I found out something that astounded me. Is there were these caves that were underwater, and in Romania, and they put a dye pack. Yeah, they put a dye pack in the water, and then everyone was on alert. All the geologists were on alert. Where would this dye come out? They figured it'd be Europe, and it turned out to be California, which was mind-boggling. And I've not even heard in the U.S. I had to hear it from a Romanian researcher, where they did a translation online on YouTube. And I was like, wow. And besides that, when we're talking about Alexander, and people think that's a Greek culture, it's not. It's Illyrian, Albanian culture, and that was a huge maritime. I mean, they had these sturdy ships. They had amazing shipbuilding capacity. these people were not isolated. They were trading with each other. They were going all around the oceans. I mean, we have this idea of very primitive people, like just starting out of nowhere, except you look at their cities, you look at the pictures of their ships. I studied the pictures of their ships and how they transported goods in these ships. And it was this huge culture, and the symbols are similar, the mythologies are similar, the stories of the gods are all very similar, as if they had contact with each other. So I know what you're saying. And then I work with the Lunar Anomaly Research Society. We were looking yesterday at old Ranger photos from the Ranger mission, and we're looking at this one area, and we're going, oh my gosh, looks like those are square craters. Okay, they're not round, they're square. How would you get a square crater? And it comes from the collapse of a building that is square. The roof collapses, and that's how you get square craters. And we're looking at also Chaco Canyon today with the round, you'll see kind of like a round kiva sort of shape, and then like a square area, and of course the roofs are collapsed. And it was just deja vu. We were seeing that over again. Ancient structure. So go ahead. This is a really important topic.
I put it actually on that on the lunar research page that I got on just on paint and drew the angles, and the walls were even consistent. It had continuity of thickness all the way around the building. So it was a hollow rock. Or it was a building. I mean, it had all the angles, and I mean, it was just, and one of the the rooms inside of it was exactly 1/4 the size of the large thing, and then there was round ones outside of it. And what it reminded me of, if you didn't tell me where it was, I would think it was in Mesa Verde. Have you been to those ruins before?
Not yet. I'm kind of new to this part of the country. I'm eager to catch up.
Yeah, you need to go to Mesa Verde. You're pretty close to it, and it's amazing. It's like it's built under this huge amphitheater-looking thing. It's built into the side of a cliff, in a canyon, and so from above you wouldn't even be able to see most of it. And that's what it reminded me of. But those buildings are still standing, I think, because they are covered. Most of the city is covered. It's built into the side of the mountain, but it's definitely worth going to see. It's amazing. And I mean, you can even walk into the little houses, and you can see where they even had a bathroom in there. It's crazy. It couldn't be anything else. But you can just go find so many places where they've hidden history, or taking the credit for something else, just like in Egypt, inside that temple where you see the petroglyph that looks like a helicopter, and the other one looks like an airplane. But people don't realize that wasn't even seen until recently, because there used to be another plate over the top of that, and whenever they were in there cleaning, that plate fell down and broke, and that's when they saw that behind there, and so that used to not even be visible. So it's like in pristine condition. And so, but you got to think, if they're dating these things, let's just say 4,000 BC, 6,000 years ago, well, what are they talking about? The golden age, like an entire age was before them. And they're talking about an age of high technology, and that's the first things that's the oldest things written, and it's like, what are they writing about? I mean, are they making up stories of high technology in their very first writings? And that, I think the Sphinx was built, toward the end of, or during that time period, and But the entire age before that, you find it in writings all over the world, in India and Mexico and all these places, that the civilizations existed before the pharaohs, And that's why there's a video, if you watch, Graham Hancock went to go talk to do a little conference in Egypt, and he couldn't even get Zahi Hawass to come in the room. And when he did, all he did is cuss and scream and holler and put his hands up trying to cover the screen so nobody would see it. And I was like, and it, you know, it kind of clicked with me. I was like, that seems like the action of a pharaoh. They all just chipped over those names. And then I remembered whenever I was in school, you never hear it anymore. I thought about this yesterday. That, you know, who was the greatest pharaoh and all this stuff. And I remember being taught in school, and, you know, like I had to write a paper, like, who is your favorite pharaoh or whatever, you know. And I wrote Ramses II because he's the one who built the Great Pyramid. And there's no way that's true, you know. And it's just every one of them taking credit. There's so much evidence of one taking credit for something else. You know, one person started off and said, I did it, whenever that was already there. But there's evidence that, see, the city of Giza wasn't there. I think they stripped down the material that they had right there. I think Giza is where it's at because they had an abundance of material already quarried right there on the pyramid and all the surrounding pyramids, and because you can see where they've been taken down. Those buildings are made of the same stone, and all over the place you see that. And what's his name? Childress, the guy on Ancient Aliens.
Childress, yeah.
Yeah, and he was down in South America, and he's pointing. He's like, the quarry's 5 miles that way. And, you know, this is hundreds of tons. Now, how would they carry it down that mountain, up this mountain, and then leave it right here? But right next to where those rocks were and everything, and come to find out, that was a subterranean ruins. The ruins there got uncovered. They were originally subterranean. But if you look right next to it and next to the just a few miles over, there's a tower. And, you know, working at Komatsu for a while as a chemical metallurgist, it was a furnace. It was an AOD furnace, you know. But it's a lot easier to have, you know, hundreds of guys walking over to the quarry, bringing back a bunch of rocks and dumping them inside of a, you know, dumping them in, melting them down. And when you do that, the softest metals, the carbons and the silica, burns off first, and you're left with something easy to work with. And I think that's how you get those perfect little angles and not just these square blocks, you know. And the negative, you see the plus with the diamond inside of it. But when we were making something like cone shaped, like, or, you know, that fits over the teeth of a bulldozer, you know, to protect it, you can just change those out. When we're making that shape inside of there, we would just make that the shape of the bulldozer teeth or the digging drill or whatever, and we would make it out of sand and then pour the rock over it, and the heat makes the sand shrink and eventually go away. And so then whenever it finally solidifies, you're left with just that, you know. And that's what I see at Pumapunku, and even the thing we call bells. You know, you pour 10 blocks. Well, you don't have enough to pour an 11th one. You got to empty your furnace to start over. You pour these little bells, and you see those at every one of those sites, just sitting beside this one type of rock, just sitting over there. And it's just, you see the same thing, like watching, and that's one of the Klaus Dana video, like, just blew me away. You know, he was a skeptic, and he was the curator for the museum in Austria, and so he was kind of the guy that everybody who wanted to discredit things, or, you know, I don't know why so many people want to suppress everything and not let us really discover anything. But he was a skeptic, you know. But then when he gets a heel bone that's 5 times the size of us, there's no doubt that it's a heel bone, and there's just no doubting it. It's not a rock, you know. And now he's even the way he talks, he's like, this is what it is, and I can't, you know, because so many people break the very first law of science, of any science experiment. You don't ever test for a result. You test and you get a result. And because if you're testing for a result, you're going to get the result you're testing for. You know, if you keep testing, you're going to get that. But the skeptic, you know, has connected it all together. And one thing I see here and in Mexico and everywhere, there's mounds. And, you know, we were talking about it before in Italy. You see the bull's head. And I think I sent it to you. There's you see a bull's head, and it's an old piece of art, and what it is it's a metal bull's head, it looks like it was on a necklace or something, but it's a bull's head with the horns, and it's got a human skull on top of it. So right on the forehead of the bull is right on the forehead of there's the picture. Right on the forehead of the bull, there's a skull, and all over Italy, you know, the people stand there watchtowers, you know. But if you go look, each one of them has a picture of a bull, and every time you find a bull, that's where you find a mound and giant bones. And, you know, people just want to say, no, that didn't exist, you know. But I don't understand why people don't want just reality, you know. There's no, you know, there's no reason. Nobody has any purpose. There's no reason why we would want our ancestors to be giants or hobbits or whatever, just the truth, you know. And it seems like it's suppressed so much, and people go to great lengths, and I've just always wondered why, because in every field that I study, and it just seems like that there is suppression in every area.
What I wanted to do is ask you about your background. You have a very interesting work background. Could you tell us how you became a metallurgist and how this fits together? Because you're going to look at things as a craftsman with a little bit different eye than a historian or a researcher. How did you get into the field that you did, and a little bit about your career?
Well, I did that for a little while, but that was never really my course of study. I went to school for computer science, and the job market around here is terrible, but down at Komatsu at a place about 60 miles south of here, they needed somebody to monitor their AOD furnace where, you know, they basically take metal, steel ore, scrap metal and everything, and you have to make this exact alloy, and it has to be within, you know, 4 decimal places of the stuff before it. So they melt it down, and and what I was doing was having to take a molten sample when they melt it down the first time, and I would put it on the mass spectrometer and find out what I need to add to it and how much weight to make it exactly the stuff before. And I worked down there for a little while, but I was supposed to be monitoring a computer, but they had no one to be a chemist, and I didn't go to school in chemistry or anything, but they said you have 90 days to learn it. But, you know, after a week, I was running the show, but they kind of literally threw me into the fire right off the bat. But every day when I was there, I just was seeing things like at Pumapunku, like I would think about it all the time because I was seeing the exact same thing everywhere, and how much easier it would be to melt down a rock, you know, than it would be to carry anything. But yeah, so I started off in computer science, you know, with the very first computers, you know, and
I was in that era.
But then I went to LSU, and basically my background's in computers and in martial arts, and that's what I've done my entire life. And but I've always been into astronomy and everything, and just a few times I started listening to Coast to Coast AM when I was young, and I started questioning the things that I was taught. And so, you know, just to figure out what answer that I was needing to, you know, answer for myself, I would go study that and become that. You know, I didn't know anything about, really about chemistry other than what I just took in, like, you know, a chemistry 101 class or something. But I've just taught myself just over years. That's all I've done is, you know, with all my spare time. But it seems to have gotten more and more lately. Now in the research societies, you know, I really enjoy it. But living here, I went and saw the Poverty Point ruins. I've seen the ruins down in Mexico, like at Tulum and Chichen Itza and places. Mesa Verde in Colorado. Anywhere I go, there's ruins nearby or caves or anything. I've always just been drawn to that. But I study that stuff all the time and discuss that with y'all in the groups all the time. But I listen to David Sereda and Michael Lee Hill, and I was already doing resonance testing because, you know, I listen to Rupert Sheldrake, you know.
Yes.
There's a few instances where I know a person who 90% of their brain matter is not there. It's water, you know, and I forgot what the disorder's called, but she was a twin. Yeah, and if she doesn't have 90% of her brain, how is she a nurse, you know? And so that really, I had to find out an answer for that, and it's because our brain might be the, you know, driving our bodies or whatever, but we've got information that's automatically learned. I mean, animals are born and they automatically know things, you know. The
morphogenetic field, absolutely.
Yeah, the morphic genetic, you know, field resonance, and that's what I've been testing, and I've been trying to, I'm like, you know, my theory is if I could find a way to tune in to any other genetic field other than ours, if I can plug into that, you would instantly have the acquired knowledge that species has. And so I've been doing resonance testing and, you know, sleep with it on and then try a different tone the next night. And I've found some really crazy stuff, you know, and the Michael Lee, the 432, doing it divisors at the speed of light, and doing alpha, theta, gamma, and seeing what each one does. But, you know, like a bass, like Rupert Sheldrake explained, you know, if a bass hits a lure here in Louisiana, and it's a yellow lure with the orange dot on it, and it associates it with pain and then dies, well, what can explain the fact that lure was working everywhere in the entire world, but once it stopped working here, it also stopped working in Australia? There's only one thing that can explain that, you know, not a week later, but right then it goes from that's why bass lures have to be constantly changed. And that's just amazing to me. You know, there has to be a field.
Yeah, that seems to be the secret of species survival, is that it's constantly accruing knowledge for adaptation purposes. It's not the morphogenetic field or the morphogenic field. The other thing that I heard about is where they were trying to do a chemical compound, like chemists in different parts of the world were trying to grow a particular chemical compound, and the first crystal of it that they grew was the slowest one, and then the time to grow that crystal would double every time. So even what we would call inanimate objects, doesn't have to be an animal, that's a baseline principle for manifestation in our reality construct, is that substances or all of it's made of consciousness, have to quickly adapt to this environment and to begin to thrive and grow, because they're all learning everything together. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. I was just thought if we could plug into, you know, if you just accidentally plugged into an animal's knowledge, I mean, that would increase your knowledge, and you don't even know what you would learn from it. But if you and I think we're on the side of a bubble in a whole sea of life. I thought about that when I was scuba diving, sitting at the bottom of the ocean. I was just sitting on my knees, and I saw all these little particles floating around past my mask, and then I realized those are little tiny shrimp and little tiny beings, and we don't even perceive it as that. And just watching, one of the Russian cosmonauts on YouTube, he was trying to get a picture of Mir, and he couldn't because there were so many things flying behind it that it wouldn't focus. And if we're in the universe, which distance wouldn't matter then if there's a field, and if the universe is full of life, then if we could connect to any one of them, well, they might automatically know that other things exist. Animals know when they're born to be afraid of a certain other animal, but they know that it exists. But over the period of somebody's life, and especially something that lived as long as we do, or 10 times longer, more learned things would be in that morphic field. And if you could just plug into any one of them accidentally, just anything other than us, there's no telling what you could learn, your perception of what reality is would be completely different, because, and I think that's just the way it is. And I watched the Helios viewer for years, and I'm watching things, no doubt, diving into the sun and against gravity, flying out of the sun, and they're not acting like nuts and bolts spacecraft or any type of craft. They're acting like animals. The way they move, and you see that one thing tethered to the sun, and then when it takes off, it kind of gives this little kick, almost like a fish, and it leaves a wake on the sun. So it was there,
a tail
and
of a tadpole or something.
Exactly. And it left a wake and just kind of swam off, and that's what it looked like. And I found all these little jellies, looks like jellyfish, that live around the sun, and that I've actually caught little glimpses of in our atmosphere and in different, everywhere I look. But around the sun, there's this jelly type being that I've found in 100 videos and in hundreds of pictures. And, just because it's not habitable to us doesn't mean anything. I remember looking in that AOD furnace, and I remember thinking, it's 4,000 degrees, and I'm standing right in front of it. And if anybody else was standing in front of it and didn't have an LX mask on and didn't have this suit on, they would be on fire and not feeling too good. But I'm pretty comfortable. And so if anything had a protective layer in its skin and was born there, or was, totally based,
that was its environment.
About only our type of carbon and hydrogen-based life could exist, but if something was made out of something else, we see extremophiles living by the vents of volcanoes, and there's no reason. It's like we're trying to find water everywhere to find life, but that's just what we need. Other life forms might not even need water, and our perception of what life even is. We might see people see things all the time, and it might be life, and we might not be seeing it as that. But with our very narrow band of in the spectrum, of what we can see, we're seeing 10% of the entire band. If we could see full spectrum, well, every time we do, we see so many things. Like Richard Dolan took some Generation 3 night vision goggles or binoculars and was watching the sky, and there's, instead of just, hey, I saw something last night, putting those on, he said he saw hundreds and thousands of things flying around in one night, and
I did that once too. I was out in James Gilliland's property in Troutdale, the East Ranch in Troutdale, Washington, and he had a screen that was like 8 inches by, 5 or something, and it literally, there was things, no insects. This was like little tiny bits of light flying around, orbs just flying around. I had seen pictures of orbs, but this time I was watching them in real time, and they were flowing around kind of almost like fish.
Yeah.
And yet it was not insects. It was not some other life form. It was something else altogether that's very active, particularly.
Well, I mean, I remember just when we were kids that there were 3 states: solid, liquid, and gas, and then plasma got added. But I see that I mean, everywhere I look, I see, and the 2-mile tall tower that Google says is just a screw up on the photos, but it happens that every time they take the pictures, the same thing pops up. But I saw a video the other day, and it looks like a 2-mile plant sticking up. And I'll send you the video. And what he did is he used software that's used for looking inside of microbiology at its layers, and you can literally see the skeleton shape inside of it. It looks like a fern. And then we took an photo and used that, and we could see the towers behind the astronauts in the Apollo mission. But plasma life, I think that's all over the place. But if something was plasma based, then being around the sun wouldn't even be a problem. And there's just, I mean, I'll send you the link. And that video is, I put it on the anomaly page, but it's shadows in the dark, and it just blows you away. And all these things you see streaking, and we see people call them rods and this and that. He took a picture, and you can see the skeleton inside of it, and it looks like it has a mouth open like a fish, and it looks like it's plasma blowing out the back, like it's sucking in space and shooting it out the back. And
that's its propulsion.
Not just one thing. He repeated it over and over and over.
Many. That was Jose Escamilla got a bunch of those. I want to kind of go back to you and your heritage. The reason why is you and I have the same heritage. On my father's side, of Cherokee from East Texas area, and on my mother's side is Irish, and we actually know what county we came out of because of the records that my grandmother and other family members, kept track of. So we were out of county court in Ireland.
My mom was in the Gregory and McGregor clan, and the other side of my family is Boyd's, and so they're both Irish and Scots-Irish, but some of them were, like the McGregors and Gregories, were made to go over to Scotland back then. I'm not sure what caused that. I'm sure it was
I just think it's interesting because I have so many friends and whatnot that have that Celtic and Native American mix. I think there's probably something to the fact that we do have a shared history from way back, and I think that we're tribal in many of the same ways. The music, the culture, the stories are so similar. It was just very easy for those two tribal type groups to get together. They had very similar culture. But what's happened is this thing called the blessed blend, and the other thing that I've noticed is how many people with that particular ancestry that end up in super soldier programs or some kind of use of psychic types of things, that seems to be a feature of that particular mix of tribal influences. And it's a sensitivity to the earth. It's a sensitivity to the earth, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. It's like this just feeling of being drawn. It's like I know something, and it's like I'm trying to remember it, and I think it's that learned field, and I hear the stories, and I've gone back and looked through the genealogy, and, just like the stories all over the planet, people got to stop looking at it as everybody was writing fiction and start looking at its history. But I know that the textbooks aren't right for a fact. I just don't know why, and it's like I'm trying to find that, and I don't know. I'm just drawn to it. It just seems natural to me. But I've always been like that. I've always been the soldier type, but I didn't want to go in the military. I was more into technology and things like that. But I do mixed martial arts. Always been into that. I think that's the Irish and the Cherokee in me. But the Cherokee were the biggest nation, and the Mayans and Aztecs say they came from Aztlan. And I think Aztlan was this area in North America all the way from, and we find it all the way literally from Canada, from them traveling up there. But I don't think they were traveling very far. It would be like us, you know, Americans traveled up to Canada. Well, it might be somebody from Minnesota, not from Louisiana or Texas, you know,
Typically
but
not, right.
they said they, you know, and so many Mayan stories, you hear them say they came down from Aztlan, and but the Cherokee Nation was the largest nation by far of all of the different native tribes, and they definitely have more history and more things that you can know about them. But our ancestors, the main story you hear across all of them, and there were different branches, like just the Cherokee here. Like when you look up the Poverty Point stuff, you'll see over in northeast Louisiana, it says the Poverty Point Indians, but that was the Washita. That's Ouchita, but they pronounce it Washita over there. There's like Lake Washita, but that you know, it was almost like different states, and it just, all the stories that I read of the Mayans, and when I was down in Mexico, all the things I see remind me of so many things here. I mean, even down to the colors and everything, but all their stories from the different tribes all say the same thing. Our ancestors were giants, and they had red hair and blonde hair, you know, and I have dark hair and blue eyes, but I have Indian in me, but I can also grow a beard, so that's probably the Celtic. But it just, every bit of evidence I find shows that it was a huge nation, and that there were multiple nations here. And even recent history, if you go back and look, even Ponce de Leon, when he came here and started making maps, the first time he came over, basically everything west of the Mississippi, it said, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it said undiscovered or unsearched territory or something like that. Why was it unsearched? There was someone there keeping them from there. That's why I'm like, I think Columbus Day is the most ridiculous thing ever. How do you discover a place that has one nation that has 16 million people that live in it?
I've laughed about that a lot of times, thinking he steps off the boat and it's like, I'm discovering you, all of you, I'm discovering you. You know, it's kind of silly, as if anyone just went from across the bay and said, I'm discovering you, and you haven't been discovered yet.
Nobody ever looks into anything, and that's why I always tell my kids, I'm like, don't believe everything that you're told, not even at school. I was like, find out on your own, because it's ridiculous. I mean, we already know, I mean, that they won't go back and change the history books, even Scott Walter and a million other people, the Burroughs Caves, I mean, everywhere you find things that literally they wrote on the rock. You know, like you'll find where, you know, it maybe the Templars or somebody were here and wrote 1192 or something on a rock. Yeah. And but it's all over the country. And I used to go rock climbing. I love snow skiing. And that's a weird thing. I'm in Louisiana. That's why I got to get out of here. But I love rock climbing, and in New Mexico and in Colorado, I've gone up and been climbing in a crack, you know, a couple hundred feet off the ground, and inside the crack find things written in there that were meant to be found later, and, you know, looks like it was put there to be protected. But there's just so many things, like the Anubis caves in Oklahoma, where you have Anubis, clearly Anubis on the wall, and Egyptian stuff. But if you think about it, Alexander the Great, the pharaohs, it doesn't even matter how far back you go. I mean, the Vikings, all of them, their nature, and the Phoenicians, their nature was to go find other things. And if you just ask yourself a simple question, if they were standing in Portugal looking out at the ocean, is it even really a possibility that they would look at that ocean and never go into it? You know?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Never go past the pillars that hurt.
Well, considering that, what I discovered, kind of having an interest in maritime history, because I lived on a boat for 7 years, is that you don't need huge shipping liners to get is the only way to do trading. There was a tremendous maritime culture. Everyone was just on the ancient Phoenicians, the people of Carthage and Rome, the Greeks, the Illyrians before the Greeks. They're building boats and building boats and building boats like it's
yeah.
And they're sturdy little craft that can take the ocean. They can take the current.
And the Chinese big cruise ship.
Yeah, they have very sophisticated navigational aids. Even the Pacific Islanders had these different navigational aids that were very sophisticated. One gentleman has been researching the Celtic cross in particular, that we see on graves often in Ireland. He actually figured out it was a navigational aid if it was built just out of metal, and you could turn it and align it with the stars. And these guys had tremendous knowledge, and that is a thing that bothers me. One thing I kind of learned being Irish and being Native American is to respect the elders, that they know what they were talking about. And even if they saw sea monsters, they would say, oh, that was mythology. And now we have these carcasses that wash up on the shores, and we discover an ancient, petrosaur or something. That was a giant squid, all the things that the ancient mariner stories talked about, have been found. And now that we have this technology, this internet technology, which allows us to share pictures and share all of this information, it's interesting to me how the information has exploded in connectivity and patterns, and yet our university systems still continue to tell the same stories. They drive me up the wall. For one thing, they'll take the same people that lived in the same area for 1,000 years, and they'll give them 10 different names, as if it was these waves of immigrants that came into the same peninsula. No, they keep renaming stuff because they're constantly trying to create compartmentalization and disconnect to something that naturally flows together and is connected. And that's what you're saying, you're seeing, is that now, like myself also, I'm now seeing the connections instead of the differences more and more.
Yeah, and I just sent you the Cherokee Zodiac, and they're, and they have records of the procession of stars that takes 26,000 years or something. So somebody had to see it at least twice, and so I think what the Mayans were saying, that we've been wiped out over and over again, and repopulated. I think there's just tons of evidence. But even the name of the four nations, the four winds, it was named that because this was a major trading point. There were people coming here from all four corners of the earth, and that's what all their symbology, has. I mean, it's crazy. But something else I wanted to send you.
You were talking about that area, and Poverty Point seems to be not a very nice name or accurate. But what I was interested in, and of course you showed the pictures of the natives there, that they even look kind of Turkish or Arabic, or their clothing was not the clothing of somebody that had to go kill an animal and skin it and make an outfit out of it. It was their clothing.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's a very significant thing I track, because I did historical costuming for a number of years. And I have found so many clues in what kind of, people wear clothing for a reason of a certain type, and it's either environmental, but it's also cultural. And so, for instance, many people have noticed all the tall hats, like the guy that's the leader of the land has a super tall hat. We've got that with the Pope as a super tall hat. And I study a little bit in the Anunnaki material, and there's some evidence from skulls in Peru that these people had elongated heads, really tall heads. And so, of course, their hat would be pretty tall. And then if you were the son of, or you were the chieftain that served under that god or whatever, you would wear something that would make you look more like the leader, the god, or whatever. And so they wore, even if they didn't have an elongated head, they wore tall hats. There was a cultural reason why they wore what they did. But we have a lot of evidence in Turkey in particular, underground in the cities of Cappadocia, where they could have 20,000
yeah,
they wore these, kind of robe kind of garments, and they had turbans, and they had diversity, like they would have silk available to them, not something that was available right there where they were at that they could trade. And that's important, because if you're saying that these people were wearing silk garments and things like that, you would imagine in Europe, and they're in this centralized area, so they're becoming sophisticated in the multiple cultures that are coming by, or even have, colonies of people from Turkey come and live there, for trade or whatever. Our entire viewpoint, I agree with you, about what was going on in North America completely needs to be upgraded based on tons of information, not just a little. If you want to talk about that a bit.
I don't know why anybody, I don't understand why people would say, okay, this is what we put in the textbooks in 1880, and so we're going to stick with that and destroy any evidence, and anybody who comes up with anything different, we're going to call it fake. It holds us back from ever learning anything, and there's just so much evidence of it. And now if we find, like that picture I sent you, the guy wearing the jacket, the Cherokee, and this was a major trading point. And if you look even at the shape of the Red River here, you can see the true shape, and this is coming from the stories that have been passed down. The shape of it was almost identical to what Plato was describing as Atlantis, the circular shape with the canals in between, and they would use those as little roads. But also this area of the Red River, it's like a horseshoe shape and then a horseshoe going the other way, horseshoe shape and one going the other way. And you can find places where I think they blocked it off to irrigate their land and to use as traveling. But if you were coming up from the Gulf, back then, this would have been, if you wanted to travel up the Red River, and like you were talking about yesterday, up to Texarkana, the semicircle, half of it's on one side of the river, half of it's on the other side of the river, but that was a major trading route. You could go straight down to the Red River, to the Mississippi River, but even if you didn't, that was the Red River, it goes for, if you stretch it out, it goes for thousands of miles, and it has its own, other rivers that go into it, other tributaries, but it would have definitely been an easy way to get a lot of places, on the land without being on foot. But the designs of the cities, it were just awesome. And I was looking at Google Earth, and the neighborhood that's right across the street from my house, I was actually looking for that shape, underneath the trees, and trying to find other places around where I'm at to go look at it again, because I'm mapping out the area right now to, go find some new stuff or some old stuff, but, look at it the right way. But the neighborhood right across from my house is built exactly like the Poverty Point city was. But they even had an amphitheater that was built inside it. But when you look at the way they dressed and everything else, you can see the influence of so many different cultures. Like the guy looks Turkish, and he's smoking a pipe that looks like it's from England. But, I just don't see the Vikings or anybody, any culture ever, all the kings, I don't see anybody ever just saying, okay, we're not going to go past the Pillars of Hercules. We're not going past Gibraltar. I think that
worthwhile.
Yeah, I think everybody traveled over here
now to go, go somewhere and pick up some goods and bring them back to your village and have a market. I'm amazed at your story about, because I'm now doing the same thing with this circular shape layouts for cities, because I was just perusing the internet, and had a website that had very futuristic types of cities that were being designed on like permaculture types of concepts. And it was like deja vu all over again. They looked like what Atlantis was depicted to be. It was the same format. And it was like either these people knew that when they designed this city and made a picture of it, or they just kind of fell into it, maybe because of a remembrance, like you said, because it makes sense. It's an efficient way to get goods and services traveled all around the city, for people to get around the city, to irrigate everything and make sure everyone had water. I mean, it's a natural human adaptation to the Earth, environment to do that.
Yeah. And, I mean, even like their sign for Earth, air, and water, if you look at it, it's the Star of David. But it's also a symbol in all the other places, only the Star of David in Israel. But you just see that there's just too many influences there. It doesn't look like somebody who was isolated. I mean, this whole area over here, according to textbooks, was just totally empty, and you might find a tribe of Indians every now and then. The stories that I've heard where there were wars here, and I've thought about it, and I'm like, is the plume serpent actually somebody's description of a mushroom cloud, were they attacking each other? I don't know. But I was, I've gone and like looking at Aramaic, because they've translated so many things wrong, and we're finding that out over time.
Yeah.
But the native languages that this was day before yesterday, I think, I was watching a video on it and kind of going along, looking at different web pages while I was doing it, reading. And some of the languages are even up to 90%, not 5% influence, 90% of the words are the same. There's different places in Mexico where 90% of the words aren't spoken. You don't have 90% similarity from the East Coast to the West Coast. Just in two different dialects, or just between Nicaragua, or especially like Honduras and Mexico. You might have like a 75-80% similarity there, of the same words. But to find the same language over in the Mideast, on tablets, and then to find it in a current or, recent history language over here, it's just, the odds are just astronomical for, unless the morphic genetic field was so strong that they decided to make the same exact language across 6,000 miles. It just doesn't, so much of history doesn't make sense. But that's why I want to look at this area again. I mean, it's not being studied. I mean, no one comes here. People look out on the internet, and no one comes here.
Wow. Well, that's another thing, too, that's very interesting about what you're doing, because we have researchers that will go, American researchers, that will go all over to all of these sites in Egypt particularly, and Middle East, and all over Europe, and they act like America's just not got any kind of interesting anything. And now, I think what's interesting now is because of this interest in antiquities and whatnot, I've noticed that local areas that want some tourism and whatnot, they're now kind of embracing their ancient sites and making them set-asides in parks now, because people are interested in the ancient history, and they may not know why, and I think it's a remembrance thing. I think it's in our genetic memory, because we have up to this point, humanity has accrued a bunch of knowledge, and I think when you're of a certain awareness of your DNA, you're very curious about your people and your background, and when you touch something, I remember the first time I heard a lot of Irish music from the pub scene, that's there, the old chieftains and all that. I got very excited about it. Now, that wasn't music I listened to every day, although my family did bluegrass type music. It just stirred me very much. I'm very stirred by the music and the culture, even though I have not been in a position to study as much as I'd like to, because I'm typical American, acculturated, and grew up with the stories of this is what America is in the history books. And when you touch on something that, you know, like is close to what your ancestors might have experienced, it has this resonant feeling. You are remembering. You're putting the member back together, and the more we respect our ancestors, that they were telling us the truth, they weren't lying, it wasn't mythology and just stories, that they were telling us human experience, and the more we honor that and try to get it as close to what they were talking about as possible, and like you said, go to those areas if you can. I'm trying. I was pinned down as a caregiver for a lot of years, so this is a new part of my life, is trying to get around to these places. But what's interesting to me is that right under our feet here in America, we have an amazing history we don't even know, and people pay all these money to tour someplace far away, and it's like, if we knew what was under our feet, if we knew what we were looking at, the world would be coming here to see our antiquities and our sites. But I think this is the exciting new thing that is going to happen in this century and this, you know, coming years, is rediscovering, remembering, and understanding what was here, what's under our feet, what our ancestors were trying to tell us, how they really lived, you know. And
they left clues. We've just got to throw the books out the door, because just the phrase "the New World," it's, you know, it says, I mean, it pretty much tells you it's a new place, and we're the first ones, and, you know, it totally throws everything off. But if you were to just throw all the textbooks out the door and then give a bunch of researchers a picture of the globe and say, I want you to tell me the history of the Earth, the United States would be studied a lot differently. You know, it's like, okay, well, I know there was nothing there, you know, but I mean, I live right here, and I've been places in, like, an island that's out in the middle of a lake, and find stuff on it and go, it doesn't fit here, you know, but what I found lately is, you know, what they say, the Poverty Point Indians in this area would be like north of Shreveport, like up closer to Texarkana, like by Vivian, Louisiana, and then it was just this little village. But when I go on Google Earth and I've been mapping it out and everything, it's stretched for so many miles, it's unbelievable. I mean, just tens of thousands of square miles.
I want to ask a question, because not far from Texarkana, heading toward Dallas, you have the complex of Rock Wall, Texas, and I wonder if that got included in, because when I was living in Texarkana, I became aware of the Rock Wall story, and just some of the things about how they covered up the story has been almost more interesting than it's fascinating. How they found a large skull that was the size of a bushel barrel. That's huge. That would be a being probably over 20 feet tall. How they found writings and inscriptions, and I was able to get a couple pictures off the internet, but not much. And also that the walls were 7 feet tall. I mean 7 stories tall. What the heck are you keeping out or keeping in? And how they did some of these one of these shows on the History Channel, Discovery, one of them, you know, gave out all the information about the Rock Wall site, but the scientists at the end had to do the plausible deniability and say, oh, this is a naturally occurring wall, which it doesn't even look like a naturally occurring wall. And so then the whole area extends out into the lake, and the residents there, except for some who have real interest, most of them have a very studied uninterest. And then they found a slab from this. This is what killed me when I found this out. They found a slab from this wall that was like a 2-ton rock, you know, a megalith rock, that they took to the courthouse jail, and it was in the courthouse, and in the still of the night, it had to be not one person, but a bunch of people stole a 2-ton rock out of the courthouse, and it disappeared. which I thought was an amazing, there had to be an inside job there a little bit, because, like, how do you steal a 2-ton slab of rock out of a courthouse? That's the jail.
Yeah.
How, and they've literally been covering up the rock wall site was discovered 150 years ago. So they've literally been working very hard to cover this up for 150 years. And then I also learned about the Smithsonian destroying or claiming, had to admit they destroyed 1,500 giant skeletons that came out of burial mounds of people that were 9 to 12 feet tall. Off of Santa Catalina Island in California, they found a mass grave of beings that were 9 to 12 feet tall, and they put them out on barges and dumped them out in the bay. I mean, who are these people doing this literal skullduggery? Yeah.
Well, it's found everywhere that, you know, and Klaus Donald was talking about it in his video, and the recent video somebody put out, it's on my page for New Year's Day, and I thought it was funny, like, what we discovered in 2015, and it said, we discovered a new race of Homo sapien, but it wasn't Homo sapiens sapiens, and they instantly put a monkey face over it. But it's because the sutures aren't in a triangle on top of the head. They go perpendicular. You know, they go across the head from ear to ear. But they instantly have to assume that it was a monkey. They instantly make it look like a gorilla. But I'm like, gorillas do not do metallurgy. They did not wear gold necklaces. They did not, you know, they're buried with all this stuff, you know. They've got tea and, you know, I mean, they've got these brass pots and everything. Monkeys do not do that, and monkeys do not have ritual burials. They did not have a religion, you know. In order for there to be, it says, we discovered a type of Homo sapien that even had, you know, a type of ape that had ritual burials. Well, in order to have a ritual burial, that means you would have to have a set of beliefs that was passed on, at least from a grandfather to a son to his son, to have a religion in the first place. So now you have a religion or a set of beliefs that was passed down, at least through the 3 generations. And, you know, I just listen. I'm like, I tell people all the time, when somebody tells you something just because they have a DR before their name, do not take it as reality, because if that's the case, then you're wanting me to be a monkey and believe that a monkey could have a ritual burial, and, you know, that they cremated their bodies. And I mean, it's insane. The stories they make up are much crazier than things were actually advanced here, you know, and a lot of it's suppressed, and people will build right over it because they don't care about it. Like in Shreveport, we're named Shreveport because, like, Henry Miller Shreve, there was a log jam in the Red River here, and he busted through it and built Shreveport right here. But why did he pick this exact spot? Well, the amphitheater that we still go sit by the river and listen to concerts, you know, and there's a few of them in this area. He just built this city where the land was already developed, you know, built right over the top of another city, and there's evidence of it everywhere. But now we have the casinos here that have gone and bought up land everywhere, and but it's just so massive around here. But I've been out to Rockwall, and I think it was all the same. I think it was a huge nation, and you know, all the stories of the populations. I went canoeing down the Guadalupe, in New Braunfels, Texas, and, you know, went riding, you know, we took some bikes and went riding all through, you know, the Stephenville area and Rockwall and, you know, near the Bush Ranch and all that, but also up into Arkansas. I went canoeing and kayaking down the Caddo River, and there's places where they, you know, you have to go miles down the river, and eventually you see rocks on both sides of you, and they have paintings and, you know, carvings on them that, you know, it wasn't some teenager with a spray can standing on top of a canoe. And there sure wasn't a teenager standing on top of a canoe with a hammer and chisel, you know. I mean, it's just the stories are insane or they're just ignored, but yeah, the naked Indian thing's just retarded. But if you even think about when you translate the names of what they called themselves, the survivors of what? That tells you right there. The survivors, that tells you that most of them are gone from something, but that tells you that there was an event that happened that destroyed the population. But right now, all of our iPhones and laptops and all of our stuff wouldn't last 50 years if we were all gone. None of our history from right now would be around. Nobody would know we were even existed. If there was a nuclear blast, I think everything would be gone, because everything we have, you're not going to have something magnetic. You're not going to find a disc on the ground. It's not going to last, And I think they had the foresight, and now we know that they did have telescopes, like that pre-Columbian stone that shows the sperm and the egg and the whole process on it. Well, that means if they could see, if they had the lenses and the optic technology to look down on the micro level, they had it to look on the macro level too. They were looking out in space also, and because there's no other reason, But it was like science went backward, From that point, we went to flat Earth, and then back again. But I think we're just now starting to see things. But I think if people will actually, like around here, actually not have any preconceived notions and just go research it with no answer they're looking for in their head, and just analyze it for what it is, you would see that it wasn't a camp of 1,600 half-naked Indians. We find pendants and stuff that has Alexander the Great's head on it. That doesn't mean that it was some grandma dropped it in 1920. That they were known, the Cherokee, and they were known for trading. They wanted other cultures. They wanted to collect from everybody that they met. They weren't attacking everybody who came. But right where we're located, you were in Texarkana, this would be the perfect place to have that kind of thing, because if you're far, we're in the Kisatchie National Forest is just a strip of land that goes from Texarkana just straight across the top of North Louisiana, and it's hard ground, no swampland, and so you could build here. But yeah, there's evidence of buildings, and here you could actually have caves, but that's not even thought of, because they think of Louisiana, they think it's just a bunch of swamp, but that's just down in South Louisiana.
Yeah,
but
down in the low lands, because there's upper lands. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that was one nation, but I think that's what Aztlan is, and the Mayan stories, we keep finding out the rest of them one by one. We keep finding out they're true. And I don't see why that one story saying that they came from here, and it was either Nebraska or Wisconsin where they found evidence of in the word Aztlan, and the Mayans even say, and even to this day, they say that their ancestors were blonde-haired, red-haired, and they had giants, but there were different races. They were at the same time, like when Klaus Donna and his last thing, there's the 7-meter beings, at 7 meters, all over the planet, and then the 3 meters, and then us. It's not like they were just randomly in between. You see different races.
In the Greek mythology, as they call it, which it turns out to be a history. I've gone into what's called the Pelagian Empire era, which is Illyrian, Pelagian, the people from Thracia or Thrace. Their stories are of the Titanic race, or the Titans, and then there was the Olympian race, which were a lot taller than regular humans. which were the children of the Titans, and then the humans that were warrior-type class or leaders were born from the Olympic race. So there seems to be this kind of stepping down. It might have been a morphogenetic adaptation to the gravity or something chemical in the atmosphere. Yeah. But it's kind of inconvenient as the population grows and there's smaller people to have a giant around. It might be kind of... there's a lot of war stories in Europe, but I also gotten wind of a lot of war stories in the American, Native American culture, that they had troubles with these coexisting. They had problems coexisting, and that they ended up having to finally kill off the giants. Because the giants, well, people say the giant race were cannibalistic, but that wouldn't be true if your compadres, you can't be a cannibal if you don't kill anybody your size. But if you killed someone smaller, that might be considered game. It's kind of gross to think about. But there's quite a bit of literature on that, like a lot, many stories, not just one or two, many stories.
Yeah, I just think the assumption to automatically put a black gorilla face over it just looks like it's just a human skull with sutures that go sideways. But to assume that, because back in the 80s they wanted to assume that all dinosaurs were lizards, and the farther we go, they find out that a whole bunch of them were birds. A whole bunch of them had feathers, and and they're, a T-Rex is built more like a chicken, We've done so much is wrong, but it's like they don't want to ever correct themselves and say, okay, we found evidence the textbooks were wrong before, and so they're holding on to the same things as before. But even the name America, the survivors, named America, and talking the same thing as in Egypt, talking about the golden age, which they were talking about the 25,000 or 100,000 years before they got there. That's why it's ridiculous to think that 6,000 years ago the Egyptians just appeared on the earth out of the sand, and the first thing they did was they built pyramids, and then that was the first thing that ever happened. Because if the pyramids were the very beginning, that doesn't make any sense.
My partner Brett says something that makes me laugh. He said, if they built the pyramids, why did they stop? How come they're still not building them? And I thought that was... And then when you get into the actual, part of my studies using the Earth Anomaly Research Society was to just find out how many pyramids there are. Well, there's not just 3 in Egypt. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of them all over the world. South America has a huge amount. China has a huge amount. You used to be able to see them on Google Earth. People were able to find them on Google Earth, but they've been altering the Google Earth map, so that's not as reliable as before.
Everywhere.
People have found them in lunar pictures of Mars and the moon. This pyramid thing was a technology that was inner solar system. It wasn't just an Earth thing, and it wasn't one culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think? I want to ask you something, too, and we're going to kind of wind it up here in a bit, but I want to ask you, being a metallurgist, we have this process of a society, I suppose, using sticks and stones, and then they're going to go into the pottery thing, and eventually either they have a war, so they have to make some swords, or they learn how to plow. When does a society go into not just the metal part of it, but the more advanced stuff? Because that was a big surprise for a lot of researchers, is the alloys, the temperatures they would have had to have been able to produce to get the alloys to be as fine as they are. That's a big point that people miss, is this isn't crude, chunky metal. This is some fine stuff.
Yeah.
Very sturdy stuff. Say you have a rock that, it's 90% carbon, and then it's got all the other little things in there. Basically, I was making pretty much a volcano, because what we were doing was, when we heat it up, we're blasting out
out of the top, we're blasting out slag, so that's the rock part of it burning off and separating from the metal. And so when we pour, once all that blows out, then we put the other metals in there to make our alloy, whichever recipe we're making. It depends on what we're building. But at different temperatures, and it even burns off in an exact order when you get to certain temperatures. But, like lava is only 600-800 degrees, and it's not hard to achieve that. And even the current AOD furnace right now, and like we built the one here down in Mansfield, Louisiana, and it's just a cylinder with kind of a funnel upside down on top of it. So it has like a mouth, like a volcano. But hang on one sec. But you can, you get different chemicals at different temperatures. But say you have the furnace going, literally the only thing that you have to do to reach those temperatures, it doesn't take any high tech, because what I would do, it's called coking up the furnace. I would throw a bag of rocks inside there, and depending on which type of rock you throw in there, limestone or graphite or whichever different type you put in will make it burn at a certain temperature. So literally, you don't have to add gasoline or electricity or anything like that. Certain types of rocks make the temperature go up massively. Because we would have to, once I threw those rocks in, I would have to run, because it would pretty much erupt almost instantly. And so you're adding a different type of rock to make the temperature go up. And it's a really simple process, and once you get a fire going and you get the thing melted, now when you toss something in, rocks are used as fuels, and at those temperatures, which aren't very high, if you can get a fire up to 600 degrees, just adding, I would add a bag of rocks to it that would instantly boost it up to 3,000 degrees. But at all these sites, you can see these tubs, and you can see the bells, the pour-offs, but it would have been so easy, because whenever you're doing that, it blows out the molten slag, and that could easily be used right then. All the parts can be used, the bricks, and you don't have to burn it hotter and hotter. You just get it to a temperature and burn it longer. And when you want to make harder metals, if you just put more rocks in, like adding more silica, just sand, if you just add silica rock to it and burn it longer, that lowers the nitrogen levels, which does what? That makes it harder. So you're making harder and harder metals. And and with the time thing you were asking, Klaus Donna was given a little dinosaur, looks like a little dinosaur carving, out of rock, and they x-rayed it, and inside the belly of it, that was a little ball. And whenever they said, okay, we're going to open up and get the little ball out, and we're talking 25,000 years old or something. They were mining, and it was down at a certain level to where it was so deep. No one dug down, 1,200 feet to bury this. And the metal ball was inside of the belly of the little dinosaur, and when they took it out, they tested it, and they called him, and they're like, Klaus, or he got it back, and it was like, oh, it's chromium. So the thing was made of chrome. And then you have to say, okay, if they could make chromium at 25,000 years ago, they could have made lots of other stuff much easier, because that's one of the harder metals to get to. The other ones on the way, steel melts down really easy, and it's easy to form. In Africa right now, they literally burn it in a trash can, and they put huge leaves over the top of it. And as they go, they add little rocks to it. But instead of carrying those big rocks out of quarries, 5 miles from where the pyramids are. If you had a bunch of guys carrying rocks on their, a backpack with rocks in it, and you got a line of guys coming by throwing it in there, it would be really, really easy to pour exact stones for a pyramid, for the temples, for anything. And the process for doing it is very low-tech. It's very, very low-tech. The only thing high-tech about the entire thing that I was doing was the mass spectrometer. But you don't really need that, That's getting really exact. Just because of what somebody ordered to their specification. They wanted it to be 5% nickel or whatever, And
I want to ask you one more question, and I've got a bunch of wonderful information from you that's enough for this show that's going to be airing. But I wanted to ask you about the Dropa stones. Do you know anything about the Dropa stones?
Dropa stones, yeah. Well, it's crazy that you see that shape. Like with the tether incident,
yes.
You see all these stone shapes going by, and like in China, they found is that the stones you were talking about?
Yes.
They found the stones, and on the bottom it's smooth, but it has grooves like in a record. And, the guy found that it actually had a language on it, and he was decoding it, and they tried to do the same thing over there that they do here. They tried to say, it's not anything to find a rock with a flat stone with a hole in it. But those were made, it looked like, to stand out, so somebody would notice that it's not just a rock, because say you're walking through the opening of a cave or just walking over a bunch of rocks, you're not going to pay attention to any of them. But if you see a total round one with a little cut out of the side, a little semicircle cut out of the side of it, yeah. But it didn't even have just a hole in it. It has a little elevated part, and it almost like the Dropa stone was like twice as thick, and they cut off, half the stone to leave grooves and stuff like that in it. But they found quite a few of them there, but just like they do here, the government takes them, looks at them, they make fun of the guy, and then you never see the things again. But I got to get a pretty good look at them, and they, the language that was written on the bottom was not Chinese, it was not Mandarin or anything, but it was a very intentional shape that they made. But it's an odd shape. It's not like it's circular, and that's it. You're seeing the exact same shape all over the place. So I think that those were made for an exact, representing something else, Yeah. Representing something of theirs. They're leaving something behind, like this is how we got here, or, maybe that's what they came here in, but that's also making assumptions. But it could have been just a data disk. I'd love to get my hands on it and look at it, because the guy who studied it said there were grooves like a record, and then there were a few written characters over that, and I have the translation, but I can't remember exactly. Oh, it said what the name of them were. It said our name is this, and I think it said Dropa, but it was describing themselves, and was it somebody who was stranded here from somewhere else, or an ancient breakaway civilization, and they were the last ones, but I think everything needs to be looked at again, because, like, we're seeing so much in our skies now. Occam's razor, if the simplest answer is usually right, well, what's been the major problem with alien creatures traveling to here, or anything traveling here? Well, they say the distance is. Well, the surface of the Earth is the equivalent size of the skin of an apple, and we've got tons of oceans. I think we're seeing a lot of things that aren't extraterrestrial. I think they're Terran. I think a lot are from here, and I've been in Carlsbad Caverns and a bunch of other places. There is so much space underneath us.
Oh, I'm going to go there. You've got to tell me what I should be watching for. I went there when I was a child. I was totally fascinated. I'm going to go there sometime this summer. And besides what the tour guide's going to tell me, what should I be watching for?
And it's crazy that you see, just without any preconceived notions at all, when you look at it, if you go look in the cenotes in Mexico, like down the Yucatan area, and you find miles deep under the ocean and also under the temples, you find artifacts that they took and left down there. But you see that all over the place. So it's like, I think that there was a major population over here, and they went. It would make sense since we have these surface catastrophes. Repeatedly, we have the stories of the underworld. It just makes sense. Why wouldn't you go underground, especially if you figured out some way to exist? And also, if I were I was in a spaceship, and I came to a planet and I didn't know the flora and fauna or any of the surface conditions, I could maybe hollow out with my laser beam an area to live on under the planet where I can control the environmental, conditions, and then explore the surface. Especially if you wanted to colonize, right? But doing that, if you have the technology to do that, now you can look at every single planet in the entire universe is habitable, and also you can't advance more than however many years between something hitting you, but if you go to everywhere you go, you put something underground, you're kind of, you have your air conditioning, you have
facility. You can have some kind of hydroponic with artificial light, like people are starting to utilize super bright LEDs to grow things indoors and have accelerated growth. You can. We have many areas like that.
Do it one place. You can do it. You would literally have the same type of structure under the surface of the moon that you would have under the structure of the Earth or Mars, and then it's limitless where you can go, and your living conditions are going to be exactly the same wherever you go, and that might be what we're seeing. You can grow the food you want and keep your culture together, and you can keep your technology safe because you're not dealing with. And you can live more than 25,000 years.
Well, on the Irish side of my family, we have lots of very light-skinned people, and Brett and I were discussing how come it is that you would sunburn under the sun that you supposedly evolved under. That doesn't make sense. It seems like some of us with the super light skin might have evolved somewhere and maybe lived subterraneally, and we came out and now we're sunburning and having to use SPF 50, sun blocker. It's crazy.
So Irish. The Irish skin would be about the radiation and light level for Mars. Yes. The sunburn thing definitely says that we're not something that's meant to be out on the surface of this planet. And I've thought about that a million times. But I think that our races from all over the planet could be possibly from all of them from different places. But we already know in history that army after army whenever they defeated somebody, tried to wipe away their existence completely, but they were destroying the prehistory too.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, thank you. You are just fascinating. You're on the ball. You've got a wide range of knowledge, which I really enjoy, because we have too many experts and that know too much about too little. I enjoy someone who has a broad education, self-education. Thank you for this interview, and we're going to be talking again with you. You've really got some fascinating correlations and connections in our ancient history all the way up to modern times. Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Please listen carefully.
Earning an executive MBA at Georgetown isn't the path of least resistance, but it does come with the greatest reward. Benefit from our strong alumni network, renowned faculty, DC location, and global residencies. Get started at choosegeorgetown.com/EMBA.